class. In today's government class, we'll be looking at nationalism. What is nationalism? Nationalism is a strong feeling of national consciousness, love and pride for one's country. It is a conscious struggle or effort by a people to control their affairs, devoid of foreign control and domination. This strong emotional awareness individuals possess of belonging to a state spurs them on to struggle against colonialism and domination or achieve great feats for their country. So nationalism basically is a strong feeling of national consciousness, love and pride for a person's country. It is like a conscious effort by people to control their own affairs. They no longer want to be controlled by foreign powers. They no longer want foreigners to dominate them. They want to have control of their own affairs. So that is nationalism, the strong emotional awareness that individuals possess of belonging to a state, and this awareness then spurs them on to struggle against colonialism and domination and achieve great feats for their country. That is what nationalism is. Nationalism can also be defined as a strong emotional awareness of belonging to a state that is held in bondage. By bondage, we mean colonialism or foreign domination. And this awareness, this emotional awareness, then leads the people to struggle against such foreign rule and domination. Nationalism could also be defined as a certain form of unity that grows out of historical experience. So this thing happened to my parents. It's happening to me right now, but I don't want it to happen to my own children. So based on how the pattern of things that has been happening before, a strong desire to change the way things are going, a strong desire for a change can also be nationalism. So nationalism can also be defined as a certain form of unity that grows out of historical experiences, the experience that people have had in the past, they are currently having, but they don't want it to happen anymore, can also be defined as nationalism. Nationalism is the sense of oneness that emerges from social groups trying to control their environment and to defend their interests against competing groups. So nationalism could also come from social groups. It is the sense of oneness that emerges from social groups that they are trying to control their environment. They want to defend their interests against other competing groups. Could also be defined as nationalism. Nationalism was in 3 stages in Nigeria. The first stage of nationalism was where the traditional rulers resisted the colonialists. So the first stage of nationalism that we had in Nigeria was when traditional rulers resisted the colonialists. Some examples of traditional rulers that restricted the colonialists are Jaja of Okwombo and Nana of Ishekiri. The second stage of nationalism is what we call Proto-Nationalism. This stage was when the nationalists agitated for greater political participation and reforms. In this stage of nationalism, what we see is that the people were not really involved in their own affairs. It was more like it was someone else that was ruling them. It was whites were the one ruling blacks. Whites were the one in the administrative sectors of Nigeria. They were the one in the civil sectors of Nigeria. They were given more advantages over the blacks that were in the civil service. So this second stage of nationalism was more about greater political participation and reforms. And the third stage and the final stage of nationalism was the agitation for self-government. We'll be looking at proto-nationalism, and I just said that proto-nationalism was the second stage of nationalism in Nigeria, whereby the people wanted greater political participation and reforms. They wanted to be more involved in their own affairs rather than someone that is not African directing their affairs. Proto-nationalism was the activities of the nationalist movement channeled towards reforms and inclusion of natives in the colonial administration of their state. It was the activities of the nationalists the activities of these nationalists under the proto-nationalism was channeled towards reforms and inclusion of natives in the colonial administration of their state. They wanted to be more involved. Why would non-Africans be in the legislative council of an African country. Why are whites dominating the legislative council of an African country, the executive council of an African country? Why are blacks given lesser roles in their legislative and executive councils? Why are they not involved, given higher participation in their own colonial, in their administration? So this is what proto-nationalism was all about. The activities of these nationalists at that time did not aim at immediate self-government. Rather, it aimed at including Africans to participate in the colonial administration. The proto-nationalism was not, the activities of the proto-nationalists was not aimed at granting them self-government, granting them immediate self-government. It was not aimed at their independence. The activities of proto-nationalists was aimed at including more Africans to participate in the colonial administration. They wanted to be more involved in their affairs. They wanted to have the same rights that the whites that were in civil service had. They wanted to have the equal rights with their white counterparts in the civil service. They wanted to be given more higher positions to under the colonial administration. So this was what the proto-nationalists were, the activities of the proto-nationalists were about. And as I said earlier, proto-nationalism is the second stage of nationalism in Nigeria. The next thing we'll be looking at is proto-nationalism before the Second World War. The advocates of the 19th century Nigerian nationalism were both traditional rulers and the few elites in what later became Nigeria. They were generally referred to as traditional nationalists. These nationalists, they were opposed to giving up their territories because they were denied respectable positions in their lands or communities by the reason of their race. So the major reason why these people were opposed to giving up their territories, the proto-nationalists before the Second World War, was because they were denied respectable positions in their lands or their communities just because of the color of their skin. Another feature of proto-nationalism before the Second World War was the increasing resistance by the people to the British conquest and their intended domination. Another feature of proto-nationalism before the Second World War is that it shows the activities of the nationalist movement, which was geared towards reforms and participation of the natives in the colonial administration rather than for immediate self-government. So the activities of the proto-nationalists were geared towards reforms and participation of the natives in their own colonial administration rather than for immediate self-government. Features of proto-nationalism. The first feature of proto-nationalism is agitation for reforms and participation in colonial administration. Nationalist demands were aimed at political and social reforms and greater participation in the colonial administration. One of the features of proto-nationalism was that the nationalists, their demands were aimed towards the political and social reform and greater participation in their own colonial administration. They wanted to be more involved in the colonial administration, in their own colonial administration. Another feature of proto-nationalism is the predominance of educated elites in the nationalism. So in the proto-nationalism was dominated by educated elites. Then another feature of proto-nationalism is the employment of constitutional and non-violent means. So under proto-nationalism, the nationalists pursued their goals through constitutional and non-violent means such as petitions, delegation, attending constitutional conferences, and many more. So one of the features of proto-nationalism was that the nationalists they pursued their goals through constitutional and non-violent means. Another feature of proto-nationalism is the activities of the proto-nationalists were restricted to urban areas. So the leaders were conservative and their activities were restricted to urban areas. So rural areas did not feel the impact of proto-nationalism much. They did not feel the impact of proto-nationalism much in the rural areas. Another feature of proto-nationalism is the existence of interterritorial movement. The existence of interterritorial movement. So the proto-nationalist movement was beyond only Nigeria. It was interterritorial. So we had the formations of associations such as the National Congress of British West Africa, and this Congress was cut across West African countries of British West Africa. So there was an existence of interterritorial movement in that's one of the features of proto-nationalism. Another feature of proto-nationalism is the formation of youth movement. So proto-nationalism was characterized by the formation of Nigerian youth movements, such as Nigerian Youth Movement, Gold Coast Congress, and many more associations. Another feature of proto-nationalism is the proto-nationalist activities were more popular along the coastal areas. So the activities of the proto-nationalists were more popular along coastal areas such as Lagos and Cape Coast. Another feature of proto-nationalism is movement activities centered on the personalities of their leaders. So most of these movements were centered on the personalities of their leaders, and when their leader dies, the movement collapses. So one of the features of proto-nationalism is the fact that the activities were mostly centered on the personalities of their leaders. It was mostly centered around their leaders. So when the leader dies, the movement collapsed. Another feature of proto-nationalism was they utilized newspapers as a major agent of operation and mobilization. So there was use of newspapers as a major agent of operation and mobilization. Most of the leaders of this movement, of this proto-nationalist movement, they were either publishers or editors of newspapers, and these newspapers were used to pursue their nationalist activities. So one of the features of proto-nationalism was the use of newspaper as a major agent of operation and mobilization. And with this, we've come to the end of this class. In the course of this class, we looked at nationalism, the stages of nationalism. We looked at proto-nationalism before the Second World War. We looked at the features of proto-nationalism. And I'll see you at the next class.